2 weeks before our wedding, my father-in-law moved in. Without warning, his suitcases already open, on my living room floor like he owned the space, and my fiancé helped him unpack as if I were the intruder. I stood in the doorway, still holding my keys, watching shirts I had ironed for our honeymoon, being pushed aside to make room for his father's heavy coats. The air smelled like unfamiliar cologne and something older. Control, maybe. My fiancé didn't look up. He laughed at something his father said, a low, obedient sound I had never heard from him before. "No discussion?" I asked. His father answered instead, "Family doesn't need permission." That was the moment something quiet inside me shifted. Not anger, not yet. Just clarity. I watched as my future rearranged itself without me. My kitchen. My schedule, my voice, reduced to a suggestion in a home I paid half for. And when my fiancé finally met my eyes, there was no apology there. Only expectation that I would adjust. I've always been the one who adjusts first. In my family, I was the quiet daughter who didn't argue when plans changed last minute, who learned early that keeping the peace earned more approval than asking for space. By the time I met Daniel, I had already mastered the art of making myself smaller, tidier, easier, less inconvenient to love. He admired that about me at first, called me calm, grounded, low maintenance. What he really meant was that I didn't challenge him. We met at work, built something that looked equal from the outside, shared rent, shared plans, shared timelines, but even then, decisions had a way of orbiting around him. Which city, which friends, which version of our future mattered more. I noticed it, I just didn't interrupt it. His father, Richard, was the same kind of man, only louder. The type who spoke in conclusions instead of questions, who treated every room like it had been waiting for him. Daniel used to roll his eyes at him, joke about never becoming that controlling. But habits don't disappear. They evolve quietly, in smaller, more acceptable ways. And I had spent years being mistaken for someone who wouldn't notice. Or worse, someone who would notice and stay anyway. The first night, Richard took my seat at the table. Not intentionally, not rudely, just confidently, as if the chair had always belonged to him. Daniel didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and chose not to. I stood there for a second too long before quietly pulling out another chair, the legs scraping softly against the floor. "Hope you don't mind," Richard said, already eating. He didn't wait for an answer. I told myself it was temporary. But the next morning, my coffee mug was gone from its usual place, replaced by his heavier one, stained at the rim. My things didn't disappear all at once. They shifted, inch by inch, like someone editing me out of a frame. Daniel started waking earlier, sitting with his father at the kitchen counter. Their conversations would stop when I entered, then restart in a different tone, lighter, rehearsed. "Dad thinks we should postpone the honeymoon," he mentioned one evening, not looking at me. "Just until things settle." Things. I nodded because that's what I did. But I noticed how decisions began arriving already made, wrapped in his father's voice and delivered through Daniel's. And every time I hesitated, even slightly, Richard would glance at me, not unkindly, just measuring, as if confirming something he had already decided about me. The realization didn't come with a fight. It came in silence. 3 nights later, I opened Daniel's laptop to send myself a document we'd been working on together. Guest lists, seating arrangements, the careful architecture of a life we were supposed to be building side by side. The file was still there, but beneath it was another. Post-wedding adjustments. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. It wasn't long. Just a list. Practical. Decisive. My name appeared. Only twice. Once next to work hours to be reduced, and once beside financial contributions. Restructured. The rest read like instructions. His father's phrasing. Unmistakable. Living arrangements. Household expectations. Even a note about maintaining respect and order. I read it twice, not because I didn't understand, but because I finally did. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't stress or poor communication. This was a plan. And Daniel hadn't just agreed to it. He had written parts of it. I closed the laptop gently. The same way. You would close a door you already knew. You weren't coming back through. In the bedroom, my wedding dress hung near the window, catching the faint streetlight. For a moment, I looked at it the way I used to, with anticipation. Then I saw it for what it was, a costume for a role I had never agreed to play. That was the moment I stopped adjusting. I didn't confront them. That would have required them to listen. Instead, I treated it like a contract dispute, because that's what it was. I worked in compliance long enough to understand leverage, documentation, and timing. Emotions complicate things. Paper doesn't. The The lease was in both our names, but the deposit came from my account. The wedding vendors were booked through my email. Paid in installments I had tracked carefully. Even the joint account we used for shared expenses had a structure Daniel never paid attention to, one I had set up, quietly from the beginning. I spent that night organizing everything. Receipts, agreements, cancellation clauses. I forwarded copies to myself, then to a separate folder Daniel didn't know existed. By morning, I had already contacted 2 vendors, neutral tone, simple request, asking about rescheduling policies and refund conditions. No explanations, just facts. I also emailed our landlord, not to argue, just to clarify options. Every response I received gave me something small but solid. A percentage, a deadline, a right. By the time the sun came up, nothing had changed in the apartment. Richard still moved through it like authority. Daniel still followed his lead. But for the first time, I wasn't reacting to them. I was moving ahead of them. I left before they woke up. Not dramatically. No slammed doors, no final words echoing down the hallway. Just the quiet click of my suitcase. Handle in the soft closure of a life they thought was already decided for me. The note sat on the kitchen counter, exactly where Richard liked to stand in the mornings. I placed it beneath my house key. By the time Daniel called, I was already across town, sitting in a small sunlit office, signing a short-term lease in my name only. I don't understand, he said. His voice wasn't angry, just disoriented, like someone who had missed a step in the dark. You will, I replied, calm enough that it unsettled him. The vendors had been efficient. The venue was canceled within the allowed window, partial refund secured. The caterer redirected the date to another client. The photographer, the florist, the planner, each one neatly untangled from a wedding that no longer existed. Daniel hadn't noticed the timelines. He hadn't needed to, until now. By the afternoon, the joint account was closed. My contributions transferred, every transaction documented. The landlord confirmed my exit clause. His father's adjustments had nowhere to settle anymore. When Daniel finally read the note, I imagined the pause, the silence stretching around him, unfamiliar and absolute. For once, there was nothing left for me to adjust to. Only space, and the quiet consequences of decisions he had already made. The calls didn't stop that day. Daniel's came first, measured at the beginning, then fraying at the edges. Confusion gave way to negotiation, then to something sharper when he realized there was nothing left to negotiate. His father called once. I didn't answer. He left no message. By evening, the story had already started shifting without me. Mutual friends reached out carefully. Their messages balanced between curiosity and caution. We heard the wedding's off? Is everything okay? I kept my replies simple, factual. No accusations, no explanations that could be turned into debate. And that's what unsettled them the most. There was no version of me to argue with, no emotional outburst they could dismiss, no scene to reinterpret, just absence, and the quiet evidence of decisions already finalized. Daniel, I later learned, struggled to explain it. Not because the truth was complicated, but because it was plain. He had agreed to a life where I had no voice, and I had declined to live it. Reputation, I realized, isn't always destroyed by what's said. Sometimes it shifts because of what can't be denied. And that's why it matters. Because anyone watching, anyone who has ever been slowly edited out of their own life, recognizes the moment when silence stops being weakness and becomes a boundary. In the weeks that followed, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt precise. I rebuilt my days slowly, morning coffee exactly where I left it. Evenings that didn't require negotiation. Decisions that began and ended with my own voice. There was no sudden transformation, no dramatic reinvention. Just the steady return of something I hadn't realized I'd been giving away in pieces. My mother called one night and asked if I was okay. I told her the truth. I am now. There were moments, of course, when memory softened things, when I almost missed the version of Daniel who used to laugh easily, who once promised me a life that felt shared. But clarity doesn't disappear once you've seen it. It stays, reshaping everything that comes after. I didn't hear from him again. Not really. And that, more than anything, confirmed what I had already understood. I hadn't lost a future. I had stepped out of one that was never mine to begin with. As for what comes next, I'm not rushing to define it. For the first time, the timeline belongs to me, and I've learned something I won't unlearn. The right life doesn't require you to disappear to fit inside it.